That's not how it works.
Yeah, how it works. What if they said it was okay?
I can take care of myself just fine.
No.
No. Wail and cry. Don't scream. Being stirred up, I think. You look about to stir up as a cesspool. You want me out?
No, I want you in. But being in means you gotta do something, not just say in.
Fuck! You didn't be.
A lot of fandoms have their little debates. Okay, no one is going to collectively agree on everything. That's just life. But I've been getting more into the movie Dead Poets Society for a while now, since like November. And one of the biggest debates that I've seen in the fandom is the nature of Todd and Neil's relationship. The ship, Anderperry, has become sort of an agreed upon canon amongst fans of the movie. And even people who are not fans of the movie have questioned the nature itself. But there are some people who are not on the same page as everyone else and goes a little bit too far with their disagreement of the whole ship of Anderperry. And it gets a little bit more intense. It gets a little bit more, dare you say, a little bit homophobic with their own disagreements. The disagreements often say like the ship is often very forced and it doesn't make sense to the story, even going as far to say it's just simply a bunch of gay people watching the movie Dead Poets Society projecting themselves onto characters and just simply perverting a innocent male friendship. And this is where I have to draw the line. This is where I come in. This is where I get to step in and just simply defend these people. Defend this ship because it does make sense in a way. And we're going to be explaining it. Today we're going to be explaining it. There is a reason why people, such as myself and many other people, find Neil and Todd to be a good pair. And we're going to be talking about how the Anderperry ship and how it actually works into the theme of Dead Poets Society. The queer coding of it all, how it relates to the theme of rebellion, while it doesn't really sideline the whole like concept of male friendship within Dead Poets Society. So, without further ado, let's discuss. I was a little bit curious as to why people are so against it in the first place, besides the obvious reasons that I came up to in my head. But I did a little bit of Google searching, and this is what popped up. It says here that some fans dislike the ship because it's seen as a forced or unrealistic romantic connection, potentially overshadowing the characters' individual journeys and the film's themes of rebellion and self-expression. And a little bit of the breakdown of why it's disliked is people say it's a lack of development, and the film doesn't explicitly establish a romantic connection between Neil and Todd, and the ship is largely fan-driven. And then the focus on rebellion, meaning that the movie centers around the characters' rebellion against the school's strict rules and the pressure to conform, and some fans feel that romantic subplot would detract from the central theme. And the next one is characters' individual journeys. Neil and Todd are both on journeys of self-discovery, and some fans feel that a romantic relationship would overshadow their individual growth and struggles. And then, lastly, potential for misinterpretation. Some fans feel that the ship could lead to a misinterpretation of the movie's message, potentially suggesting that the movie is about finding love rather than finding one's voice and living life to the fullest. I guess like the reason that the overview is saying is kind of like a misinterpretation of the possibility of the ship itself, and it kind of misinterprets the whole theme in general. So we're going to be breaking that down. So the obvious reason why people ship these two in the first place is just the queer coding of it all. A lot of queer people can grasp onto the movie because of the fact that Neil and Todd are very relatable characters, and they often see themselves in them, and their character arcs have some subtext of queerness in it. But if you don't know what queer coding is, let me get a little bit of a Google definition. Queer coding refers to implying a character's LGBTQ plus identity through subtext or stereotypes without explicitly stating it, often used to navigate censorship or societal norms. Queer coding is a storytelling technique where characters are given traits, behaviors, or mannerisms that suggest they might be a part of the alphabet mafia, gang, what's up, and do that without explicitly identifying them as such. And the historical context around it is it emerged as a way to represent queer characters in media when explicit depictions of LGBTQ plus identities were censored or discouraged. To be more specific, this technique was mostly used around the 1930s when the Hays Code was put in place. The Hays Code is basically the Hays Code was a film censorship set of rules that studios had to abide by that tells them what they can and cannot put on screen at the time. One of those were drugs, interracial relationships, sex perversion meaning homosexuality, and that was the biggest thing that they could not show in movies back then. And nowadays, the Hays Code has obviously been lifted, but still some forms of the Hays Code still live on to this day, with some queer-coded characters in the late, let's say, 80s, 90s, even the new millennium still happen to this day, and it still surfaces in other ways, such as queer baiting. Because of the ambiguity of the relationship itself, it sometimes can fall in between these two categories, queer coding and queer baiting. Queer baiting is when creators intentionally hint at a queer relationship or character identity without ever confirming it, often to attract a queer audience without truly embracing queer representation. So over the years, queer representation was so invisible or just simply not there because of these things like the Hays Code, like I said earlier, which led a lot of us to simply go off on breadcrumbs of queer-codedness of characters. And it kind of forced a lot of people to having to relate to some characters who are straight or were coded in a way. So it's not surprising that movies back then and now have a habit of doing this. And to be more specific, Disney back in the 80s was very famous for having queer-coded characters like Ursula in The Little Mermaid, Scar in The Lion King, Hades, Jafar, Captain Hook, General Radcliffe, Dr. Facilier, and Princess and the Frog, Maleficent. The list goes on. And the Renaissance of Disney, the soundtrack was mostly created by gay men. And they were mostly behind the scenes directing the movie. Like I said, The Little Mermaid was the soundtrack to The Little Mermaid was created by a gay man, and then Beauty and the Beast also had some queer coding to an extent. Some queer people could relate to the story of Beauty and the Beast. So it's not surprising that queer people do find some subtext within Neil and Todd's storylines because people have always had to figure out some breadcrumbs to an extent to at least have some representation. And to get into their whole character arcs, Neil's arc was centered around his relationship with his controlling dad. He wanted his son to be a doctor. Neil wanted to be an actor. His entire arc was simply him following his own passion and ambition. He is inspired by Keen to sign up for the play A Midsummer Night's Dream, which his father finds out and ultimately tries to like get his son to quit the play. And at the play, we get scenes that try to allude to something more. Specifically with his conversation with Keating about his dad making him quit the play, there was always like a hinting of something that's bothering him even more. It's not the fact some fans feel like him wanting to be an actor was always like a metaphor for something else. And it's queer-coded because like some people, like a lot of people, but especially queer people, can relate to the fact that they cannot always be themselves with their family. And Neil can't always be himself with his dad. And there's always been like a vibe throughout the movie. It's never always like said that Neil is explicitly like likes either gender. To me, I always just get a vibe from Neil. Like I just don't really see him with. I just don't get the vibe that he likes girls. When Charlie brought girls to cave, like his most reaction was mostly annoyance to an extent. Like he wasn't really that into it. Like some of the other poets were, like Meeks and Pitts. He just wasn't that into it. Also with lines, like going back to the Keen conversation, with lines like he's trapped and how he just can't really show his true self in general with his dad. I feel like it's about everything, really. It's about him wanting to be an actor, just simply his true self. His father constantly stifles him to be exactly what he wants to be. And the constant like push and pull with his dad is very relatable, and also it's very queer coded because like a lot of like queer boys growing up often have to deal with a constant push and pull with their own fathers, with fear of disappointing them because they're just simply themselves. His arc mostly challenges the toxic masculinity in the conservative 1950s and the pressure of gender roles, and the fact that, well, it's not the fact that he was in theater and he was into poetry that makes him like a queer-coded character. It's always just been vibes alone for me, and fans feel that too. It's just simply the subtext of it all, how it's used to convey something that's going on more deeper in his mind. And scenes like his conversation with Keating, and especially his final confrontation with his father, with the anxiety he was feeling in that moment, it mirrored kind of like a feeling like, oh, he just got outed, like when his father saw him at the play, and another line saying like, I just have to tell you what I feel, and just him backing out when his father like shuts down the opportunity for him to like open up even more. And the suicide also is just like an effect of not being accepted by his father. Also the fact that since his father wasn't crazy about his son being an actor, he definitely wasn't going to be accepting about him being gay either. So again, a lot of his story is queer coded because it's a similar story that queer people can relate to, and also aspiring artists can relate to too. And if you're both, it's like 2 in 1. Like it's an arc that a lot of people can relate to. Moving on to Todd's arc, it's mostly centered around finding his voice. So in the beginning, he's presented as a very shy boy who is completely afraid to stand out. A line that sticks to me the most is that you say things and people listen, and I'm just not like that. This is because he is convinced that he doesn't have a voice after years of being in Jeffrey's shadow, his older brother. Jeffrey is his older brother, and he was the star student at Welton. This obviously like leads to a lot of like a very like complicated relationship with his family, because Todd's parents are kind of neglectful. They just don't really think that much of him, because in comparison to Jeffrey, he is the star student, while Todd is just an afterthought. So this eroded his self-esteem in a way, to think that what he has to say does not matter, and that he is just nothing. He's just an embarrassment as what Keaton would say. Now, how it's queer-coded is the constant comparisons to the poet Walt Whitman. And Walt Whitman was a queer poet, so that kind of like, it's kind of like making fans kind of go like, something's happening. Like, this comparison means something. Especially if you know the works of Walt Whitman. I personally don't, but like some people do. But one video that I watched that was talking more in depth about the masculinity of Dead Poet Society and a little bit about the queer coding of it all. The man in the video was talking about when Todd was doing his improvised poem. One line he was saying like the madman was screaming truth at him. This could read that he's afraid of like embracing certain parts of himself, whether it was him being gay or something else. I think it's like a little bit of both. I think it's about him, I guess like it's a mixture of both. He's afraid to stand out, and he's afraid of like realizing the truth about himself being queer, because again, it's the 1950s, it's very conservative, it's illegal to be gay. We have to remember this throughout the episode as to why the relationship itself is rebellion, but we'll get to it. Another reason that his arc is queer-coded is just the relationship with Neil itself, because it's obvious that Todd is mostly himself with Neil, and Neil creates this safe space for Todd to be himself and to find his voice. When you're in a good relationship, when you're in a healthy relationship, it allows you to evolve, and it helps you discover parts of yourself and to level up to be the best you that you can be. You don't have to be in a relationship to do that, but I just mean that a good relationship does play a factor. And Todd's relationship with Neil does play a factor into his character growth, his self-discovery. What's queer-coded is the emphasis of how important this relationship is. The emphasis of how Neil's love and care affects Todd the most when Neil's suicide happens. What's queer-coded is the fact that Todd is like gives very lovey-dovey eyes to Neil. Both do. They always exchange like very loving glances, and it's shown throughout the movie sometimes. Like one scene in particular, when Knox was making that phone call to Chris, there was this like little like scene right there, that little frame where Neil is just giggling into Todd's, like smiling on Todd's shoulder, and it's very cute. And there's something about that scene, like they could have just did like a wide shot like they did beforehand, but the director closed in on that particular scene, and there's something about that makes us, I don't know, he wants us to pay attention, even though that's not really, that was never really, I don't really think that was really the director's like intention to explicitly make it like a romantic relationship. I feel like it was always like the ambiguity of it all that made it very like interesting in a way, because scenes like that really do add to the queer coding aspect as a whole. But because of the relationship was emphasized to be something more, it led Todd in the end to finally like find his voice and to level up. Okay, the male friendship of it all. So the film is mostly about the importance of male friendship, which is something that is rarely depicted on screen in a way that's meaningful and not so surface level and empty, because that's like nowadays that's basically how like some male friendships are portrayed, and sometimes that's a mirror of how it can be sometimes in real life. But yeah. But Dead Poet Society is very different. But the idea that it's just the idea that Neil and Todd being a couple cancels out the theme of male friendship is a very slippery slope of homophobia. I say this because we have this internalized idea maybe this is just me. This is just my opinion. We have this internalized idea that when depicting male friendship on screen, that the men have to be heterosexual in order for the message of positive masculinity to come across, while in a way othering queer men. The whole idea that queer men are not real men and therefore they can't be examples of like male role models, and queer male friendships don't exist, or it's impossible for queer men to coexist with straight men, like men with diverse sexualities, and like they just can't be friends. Like that whole idea that it's sort of like promoting, it's a little bit toxic. I mean, it is toxic. And that, especially like the fact that queer men sometimes are not seen as role models for young boys, and that can really depend on how you're classed and raced. That really does depend, but it really does like promote like a very negative message. But again, this might be just in my head, but if we're just talking about like the male friendship of it all in the Poet Society as a group, the seven of them do portray an ideal depiction of male friendship and the importance of it. That's really what takes center the most, aside from like the romantic subplots and the subtext of Neil and Todd of it all. Like it really does center the importance of male friendship. And we just don't really get that many depictions of it like female friendships did in the 90s and the 2000s. I also feel like I need to add that there are many like fan fictions that do depict the poets being queer in some way and still do present a very good like representation of male friendship. Whether Charlie is bisexual in one fan fiction or Meeks is like asexual, it's still like they still like it doesn't really like matter. It doesn't really like negate the message of like male friendship, because as a group I do see that they're just simply good friends to each other. And even in like depictions where they're like friends with Cameron, even with like most fan fictions depicting the poets being queer in some way, it doesn't really like cancel out the whole message of friendship, because as a group they really are just simply a found family, and there are rocks for each other, and they are very supportive. They all just create like a very safe space, and that's the beauty of friendship. The whole idea with Neil and Todd being in love and them being a couple, how the assumption with some fans thinking it's very forced, it'll just deter from the plot in general. How it just simply like it'll just deter from the plot of like rebellion. Well, like it or not, queerness is seen as political. When you're not straight or cisgendered, you're just inherently rebelling against what is considered the right way to live your life. Neil and Todd being in a relationship would be exactly that, rebelling against the conservative 1950 standards that they were in, that the movie takes place in. And we should remember that the fact that it is an all-boys school, and it's a Catholic school, to be more specific, and that a relationship between two guys would be the most scandalous to them, the ultimate carpe diem. Neil and Todd discovering their sexuality with each other, it only adds on to the theme of self-discovery and living life to the fullest. And the best part is that they would be doing it together. And they would be having the full support of their friends, Keating, and just simply they're just gonna be more rocks for each other to lean on. I feel like how it would work is simply if the movie was going to be remade, I feel like more scenes would be needed to flesh out the characters, specifically the 7 main characters as a group as a whole, to see like how they work as a unit and make the audience believe that they really did like form a found family, and especially like more scenes to like flesh out the more individual characters to like see how the pressures of the conformity and the strict rules of the school like really do affect them, like how it really makes them feel, to flesh it out. It's like, I don't know, like some of the characters in the Poet Society, I just don't really, I just need to know, I need to know more of. Like, for example, Meeks and Pitts are just simply there. I don't really know why they're there. Like, I know why Neil and Todd are there. I know why Charlie's there. I know why Knox is there. I know why Cameron is there. I know what he represents, but I don't know what Meeks and Pitts represent. We just needed more scenes to like flesh out why these 7 main characters are going to be the most effective with Keating's teachings, how they are how like everyone else in the school, they are the most like they just feel the most trapped in the moment of the school's expectations or their family's expectations. We just really need to like have more scenes with them together and their relationships with each other to really see how they relate to each other, how they form this group, how they find solace for each other, how they are rocks for each other. And specifically with like seeing more scenes with Neil and Todd, it would give fans more of an insight into the relationship and see how much Neil's death would affect Todd in the end. And it would also like see more of like how Neil and Todd would work as a dynamic in general. We do get scenes with that, but like it's just really like, at best we get like, let's say like 2 scenes. Like 2 scenes. We really just get 2 scenes of like their dynamic as a whole. And then we get crumbs, like little stares and like little cute little smiles. Like, yeah, that's cute, but like we still don't know to an extent like how does this, like, we just don't really, sometimes like, even though the ultimate climax of like Ethan Hawke's performance as Todd's like reaction to Neil's death was a good performance, and his end, and like the ending was very bittersweet. The ending was very bittersweet. We still, I don't know, we still, as the audience, we just don't know to an extent like how important this really, like, we just still don't know like the full intensity of like their relationship, like how, like truly, like how much does this really affect you? We just really need more scenes to flesh out more of the emotion so we can feel the emotion. Like, we did feel the emotions watching the movie, but we just needed a little bit more. With some people, I felt like looking back, it felt like it was more of like a rush to get to that climax, you know? It feels like it felt a little rushed. Maybe that's just me. But anyway. Now, again, there are people who are against the ship in general and will say, why can't just 2 boys just be friends? It makes me want to roll my eyes. And obviously no one is saying that, and if they are, it's just problematic and weird. Like, obviously 2 boys can just simply be friends. It's very possible to just simply have a very close platonic relationship with someone and you really just don't feel any romantic or sexual attraction to them. Like, it's very possible, whatever gender the person is. And obviously in the movie there are characters who do have that level of closeness, and they're just not, it's not like that. For example, Neil and Charlie, they are closer and have known each other for years, and Charlie has known Neil more than Todd has known Neil himself, because Neil and Charlie had known each other their entire lives. Todd has known Neil for 4 months. Now, Todd's reaction to Neil's death, having a literal emotional breakdown in the snow, for someone you have known for only 4 months, is a little intense. And that within itself is kind of like a sign that they are more closer than any of them, like, than any of the other poets. The context being that Neil and Todd's relationship clearly is just different than their friendships with the rest of the characters, in general, and the movie like goes out of its way to constantly like remind us of that. But everything to an extent. To an extent, Neil and Todd's relationship is mostly portrayed as platonic with hints of like attraction. Yes, it is like that. We just have to remember that there are levels to friendships to an extent. Like, even with very close like friends in your life, there are still invisible boundaries that you know you wouldn't cross with certain friends. And obviously, like, this isn't really to like say that romantic relationships trump friendships. I'm just saying that there are just certain things you'll do with your partner that you wouldn't even do with your closest friend. Like, there are many levels to friendships, and friends don't look at each other with very romantic, loving eyes all the time. You look at your friend with admiration, and you do love your friends, but again, there are levels to it. And to talk about their scenes, the way that they look at each other, it's just not really a look of like friendship, platonic love. It's really a type of like look that gives like very like a secret smile or like admiration. Like, it's just something like, it just simply like with Neil, it's just simply, and Todd, like, I guess with Todd too, like, they just both look at each other with very adoring eyes. And it's something that is that's very cute to see, because again, there are just levels to it. Like, there are just things that you wouldn't do with your closest friends. That's just how I look at it. We always have to remember, to an extent, we can like have very close platonic friendships and not have it be romantic. But again, there's just always going to be certain things you wouldn't do with your closest friends. You know what I mean? Like, there's always like an invisible boundary there, you know? And also, if you watch Dead Poet Society with a queer lens and have the exact same events play out, if we just like watch the movie with that thought that Neil and Todd are in love in mind, like, you're just going to get the same outcome. And you're going to be even more depressed with the ending, because it now reads as like a very like a doomed first love. And yeah, it makes me cry a little bit like thinking about that, because it is just a doomed first love. And the fact that people say like, why can't two boys be friends, it's not always like it's not, that sentiment doesn't really have that much of a punch like it does, because I can say the same thing about why can't a boy and girl just be friends. All of my life, growing up and watching TV and film, I have seen people immediately assume an interaction between a boy and a girl to be automatically romantic. And I guess like the constant like assumption that men and women cannot be friends. I guess more specifically, straight men and women cannot be friends with each other, and that the sex part will always get in the way. Basically, a Harry Met Sally moment. And obviously, that same extent is sometimes expressed towards queer people in general. Like, some people think that queer people cannot be friends with each other because the sex part always gets in the way too. That's not really inherently true within itself. One ship that comes to mind is Starco. Star and Marco from Star versus the Forces of Evil. Their relationship was a perfect best friends relationship, and shipping culture has ruined what could have been like a simple, beautiful friendship. And even though they do look cute as a couple, the whole shipping culture thing did ruin the aspect of their like beautiful friendship they had in the beginning of season 1. And it did feel like Starco was a little bit forced because everyone just like was just like shipping Starco. And yes, it's beautiful, but like it just ruined it, you know? And it's not always like like that's just why I don't really take that whole why can't two boys be friends argument when it comes to ships like Neil and Todd and Mike and Will, because it's not always a sentiment that is considered with straight characters in film. So let's just check ourselves, you know? I mean, like it's just not that, it doesn't really pack a punch like it does, you know? So let's just try to reach a middle ground, shall we? Okay. We really do need to remember that art is subjective and multiple things can be true at once. Yes, Dead Poet Society is a movie about self-expression, dealing with conformity versus nonconformity. It's also a classic Robin Williams movie, and it's a good representation of male friendship and commentary on toxic masculinity. And it can also, like, and it can also be an unintentional queer film. Multiple things can be true at once. And just like how one side says they're just friends, and the other side says that they're in love, everyone is saying the correct things. We're just saying it differently, because we're correct in saying that Neil and Todd care very much about each other, and that their relationship is very deep. We can agree on that, and even though it'll always be like a constant agree to disagree, I personally think... Ooh, lost my voice. I personally think, in my own personal headcanon, that Todd and Neil are best friends. And they're also boyfriends. Dark academia boyfriends. And that's just that. And I say this because it really does make sense to the story. Because when you do look at Dead Poet Society through a queer lens, it really does it's more like the theme of like self-expression really does hit home. Like it's a home run, because queer culture does like inspire self-expression. And also queerness can also be read as like a rebellion, because heterosexuality is seen as the default and queerness is seen as the other. So I really do think that it really is just simply canon either way, and that fan interpretation should be respected, and that we shouldn't really be dicks about it. Like, if you disagree with this whole Anderperry ship, that's fine. You can just simply say, I just don't see it. And you can just simply move on. But I just simply think that they just simply work better together as both, because they are simply rocks for each other, and they do provide a space for them to grow and like lean on each other. And that's a beautiful thing. I think that being best friends with your partner is best case scenario, and Neil and Todd are a good example of that. And that's just simply how I see it. But anyway, that's just simply how I see it. But anyway, that's kind of me defending this ship. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of all I have for today. Thank you for listening to Pisces Prince. You can follow the podcast on Spotify, anywhere you stream podcasts. You can follow the podcast on Instagram, on TikTok at Let's Discuss Podcasts _ all lowercase. And you can follow me, Nick.Marshall02, all lowercase. And I hope you guys have a beautiful rest of your day, week, month, year. And it's been a nice talk. It's been a nice talk. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. All right, bye.